The rain in Oak Haven, Ohio doesn't just fall, it drowns. I stood under the flickering neon sign of the manufacturing plant where I'd spent 12 years of my life, watching my old sedan get towed away. Transmission blown. My wife, Elena, wasn't answering her phone, which was odd because she was always my rock. We had been married for a decade built on what I thought was unbreakable trust. I was a man who believed in the sanctity of a promise, in the quiet comfort of coming home to the same smile every night. But as I stood there shivering in the damp air, I had no idea that the mechanical failure of my car was the first domino in the total collapse of my life. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. I looked around the thinning parking lot, and that's when I saw Marcus, a floor manager I barely knew, pulling up in his sleek black SUV. "Need a lift, David?" he asked. It was a simple question, a kind gesture. I climbed in, grateful to be out of the rain, never realizing I was stepping into a nightmare that would leave me questioning every second of the last 10 years. As we drove through the winding suburban streets of Oak Haven, Marcus talked about his own life, a messy divorce, a house that felt too big. I sat there, feeling a sense of pride as I talked about Elena. I told him how she was the heart of our home, how she managed our finances, and how she was the only person I truly trusted. In my mind, our life was a masterpiece of stability. We had a colonial-style house on Elm Street, a golden retriever named Jasper, and a routine that felt like a warm blanket. I remember telling Marcus, "I don't know what I'd do without her. She's the one thing in this world that makes sense." Marcus just nodded, his eyes fixed on the road, a strange shadow crossing his face. I didn't think much of it then. I was too busy being the man who had it all figured out. I thought betrayal was something that happened to other people. People who didn't communicate, people who didn't love as deeply as we did. I was a fool, blinded by the very light I thought was guiding me home. About 10 minutes from my house, Marcus took a turn I didn't recognize. "Shortcut," he muttered. We ended up in a wealthier part of town, the Heights, where the driveways were gated and the lawns were manicured by crews, not husbands. He pulled over near a high-end bistro called the Silver Lining. "Mind if I grab a quick takeout order? I haven't eaten all day," he asked. I told him it was fine. I sat in the car watching the rain streak down the tinted windows. My phone buzzed. A text from Elena. "Still at the library, honey. Late shift. Love you." I smiled, leaning my head back against the leather seat. I felt lucky. But then, as I looked out toward the entrance of the bistro, I saw a woman walk out. She was wearing a trench coat I recognized. She was laughing, and she wasn't alone. My heart did a strange, painful skip. The woman was leaning into a man who definitely wasn't me. He was older, dressed in a sharp suit, holding an umbrella over her with an intimacy that turned my blood to ice. As they reached a silver Mercedes, the woman turned her head. It was Elena, my Elena, the woman who was supposed to be at the library, the woman who had just texted me, "Love you." The world outside the SUV window began to spin. I felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the vehicle. I wanted to scream, to jump out and confront her, but my limbs felt like lead. I watched them share a lingering, familiar kiss before she slid into the passenger seat of the Mercedes. Marcus returned to the car with his brown paper bag, oblivious, or so I thought, to the fact that my entire reality had just shattered into a million jagged pieces. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. Marcus started the engine, and the hum of the car felt like a roar in my ears. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. How do you tell a near stranger that you just watched your wife's soul leave her body in the arms of another man? I kept my eyes on the window, watching the rain-slick streets of Oak Haven blur past. Marcus asked me something about the weekend, but his voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. I was replaying every late night at the library, every girls' night out, and every extra shift she'd claimed to work over the past year. The trust I had boasted about only minutes ago now felt like a heavy, suffocating weight. I realized then that trust isn't just a feeling. It's a blindfold. And for 10 years, I had worn mine willingly, tightened by the hands of the woman I love most. When Marcus dropped me off, he looked at me with a concerned frown. You okay, David? Nas, you look like you've seen a ghost. I managed a tight nod and thanked him for the ride. I walked up my driveway, the wet pavement gleaming under the porch light. Inside, the house was silent. Jasper greeted me at the door, wagging his tail, unaware that the foundation of our home had just turned to sand. I walked into our bedroom. Her side of the bed was neatly made. Her jewelry box sat on the dresser, containing the necklace I'd given her for our anniversary. I opened her laptop. I knew her password. It was our wedding date. I felt like a criminal, a voyeur in my own life. But the need to know the truth was a fire burning in my chest. What I found wasn't just a fluke. It was a digital trail of a double life that spanned nearly 3 years. There were emails, hundreds of them. They weren't to the man I saw tonight. No, that man, whom I later identified as Julian Vane, a local real estate mogul, was just the current investor. Elena had been using our joint savings, money we'd set aside for a future child, for a house, for our retirement, to fund a lifestyle I knew nothing about. She wasn't just cheating, she was embezzling from our marriage. She had set up a dummy corporation, EM Consulting, and had been funneling our money into it to pay for designer clothes, hotel rooms, and high-stakes gambling debts I never knew she had. The library wasn't a place of study, it was a cover for her secret office. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the screen reflecting in my tear-filled eyes. If you were in David's shoes, facing a betrayal of this magnitude, both emotional and financial, what would be your very first move? Share your thoughts in the comments. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the hours downloading bank statements and taking screenshots. I moved my personal belongings into a suitcase and hid it in the attic. I needed to be calm. I needed to be the man I was before I got into Marcus's car, even though that man was dead. When Elena finally came home at 1 a.m. smelling of expensive perfume and rain, she walked into the bedroom and found me sitting in the chair by the window. David, why are you sitting in the dark? She asked, her voice light and melodic. The same voice that had whispered, I do. She reached for the light switch, but I told her to leave it off. I asked her how the library was. She didn't miss a beat. She told me about a research project she was helping with. She lied with a grace that was terrifying. When it was at that moment I realized I wasn't just married to a cheater, I was married to a stranger. I turned on the lamp. I held up a printout of the bank transfers to EM Consulting. The color drained from her face so fast it was like watching a ghost manifest in front of me. For a moment there was silence, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. Then the excuses started. She said it was a mistake, that she was trying to invest for our future, that the man I saw was just a business associate. But I wasn't the same man who had left for work that morning. I told her I saw them at the Silver Lining. I told her I saw the kiss. The mask of the doting wife finally cracked, and underneath was something cold and calculating. She didn't cry. She didn't beg for forgiveness. Instead, she looked at me with a sneer and said, "But you were always so boring, David. Did you really think a life of manufacturing and Netflix was enough for me?" The divorce wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a battlefield. Elena, realizing she had been caught, tried to burn everything down. She claimed I was abusive, that I had forced her to hide the money. She hired a shark of an attorney who tried to paint me as the villain in our Oak Haven community. I felt the walls closing in. My friends looked at me differently. My neighbors stopped waving. But I had the paper trail. I spent every cent I had left on a private investigator named Silas Thorne. Silas was a man who lived in the shadows of the law, and he found things the bank statements couldn't show. He found the connection between Elena and Julian Vane. It wasn't just an affair. It was a scheme to strip the assets of unsuspecting middle-class husbands like me. I wasn't the first victim, and if I didn't stop her, I wouldn't be the last. Silas discovered that Julian Vane's investments were actually part of a larger money-laundering ring operating out of the Silver Lining. Elena wasn't just a bored housewife. She was the accountant for the operation. She had used our marriage as a clean front to hide her involvement. The family secrets and revenge that I was beginning to uncover were deeper than I ever imagined. I met Silas in a dusty diner on the outskirts of town. He handed me a folder. David, this goes beyond a cheating spouse. This is federal level. If you bring this to the police, she's going away for a long time. But so is Vane. And he's a dangerous man. I looked at the photos of Elena handling envelopes of cash. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in David's story and share your thoughts in the comments. I had a choice. I could take the evidence to the divorce court and get my money back, or I could take it to the FBI and destroy her entire world. The man I used to be would have chosen mercy. He would have wanted to protect the woman he once loved. But that man died in Marcus's SUV. The man I was now wanted justice. No, he wanted more than justice. He wanted her to feel the same coldness she had left in his heart. I contacted an agent I knew through the plant's security firm. I handed over the digital ledger, the photos, and the dummy corporation filings. I watched as the wheels of the American justice system began to turn. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the 10 years of my life she had treated like a game. I was the player now, and I was moving my pieces toward checkmate. The morning of the raid was surreal. I was at work, sitting in the same office I'd occupied for a decade, when the news broke on the local Oak Haven station. Federal agents had descended on Julian Vane's estate and the Silver Lining. They also arrived at our colonial house on Elm Street. Elena was let out in handcuffs, a designer coat draped over her shoulders, her face a mask of shock and fury. The perfect wife was on the front page of the morning paper, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But the victory felt hollow. My house was a crime scene. And my savings were tied up in legal freezes, and Jasper, my dog, was the only one left who still looked at me with the same eyes. Revenge is a dish best served cold, they say, but they don't tell you how much it freezes your own soul in the process. In the weeks that followed, the truth about the EM consulting scheme rippled through Oak Haven. Other men came forward, husbands who had lost their homes, their businesses, and their sanity to Elena and Vane's predatory charms. I became an unwitting hero to some, and a pariah to those who still believed Elena's lies. I stayed in a small apartment downtown, leaving the house on Elm Street to the bank. I went to the prison to see her once. Not for closure is a myth, but to see if I could find a trace of the woman I had loved. She sat behind the glass, her hair unkempt, her eyes hollow. Wait, she didn't apologize. She just asked if I had kept her jewelry. I realized then that she never loved me. I was just a reliable piece of scenery in her elaborate play. Starting over at 45 is a daunting task. I had to rebuild my credit, my reputation, and my ability to look a woman in the eye without searching for a lie. I poured myself into my work at the plant, eventually being promoted to a directorial position. I sold the Golden Retriever's old toys and moved to a small cottage by a lake in a neighboring state. I started a blog, a place where men and women could share their stories of betrayal and recovery. I called it The Truth Behind the Smile. It wasn't about hate, it was about the reality that we never truly know the people we sleep next to. I began to find a new community, one built on the scars of the past rather than the illusions of the present. One evening, 2 years after the trial, there was a knock at my door. It was Marcus. He looked older, tired. He told me he'd been following my story and that he had something to confess. David, he said, his voice trembling, that day in the rain, I didn't offer you a ride by accident. I had seen her with Vane weeks before. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought if I just drove you past that bistro, you'd see for yourself. I stared at him. The man I thought was a random Good Samaritan had been the catalyst for my entire destruction. Why didn't you just say something? I asked. Marcus looked down at his shoes. Because I was the one who introduced her to Vane at a company gala years ago. And I felt responsible for the monster she became. If you found out a friend had hidden a truth like this from you to protect you, would you forgive them or cut them out? Share your thoughts below. I didn't forgive Marcus that night, but I didn't yell either. I realized that everyone in this story had been playing a part in a tragedy of my own making, a tragedy of blind trust. I thanked him for the ride that day, because without it, I would still be living a lie. I would be a man whose life was a beautiful, hollow shell, waiting for the day it finally collapsed under its own weight. I've learned that the horrible truth isn't that people lie. It's that we let them. We see what we want to see until the world forces our eyes open. Today, I live a quiet life. I have a car that runs perfectly, and I don't ask for rides anymore. I look at the world with clear eyes, knowing that while trust is a gift, the truth is a necessity. Elena is still serving her sentence in a federal facility. Julian Vane is gone, his empire dismantled. And me? I'm still here. I've found a peace I never had when I was happy. It's a hard-earned peace, one that comes from surviving the worst betrayal imaginable. My life isn't perfect, but it's real. And in a world of secrets and revenge, reality is the only thing worth holding on to. Thank you for walking through this journey with me. It's a story of how one simple ride can change the trajectory of a life forever. If this story moved you or made you rethink the trust you place in others, please let us know. Thank you so much for watching. If David's journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and leave a comment with your thoughts on his revenge. And subscribe to our channel, Family Secrets and Revenge, for more stories that expose the truth behind closed doors. Don't forget to share your overall thoughts on the story below. I'll be reading every single one. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, the truth is always there, waiting to be seen.